As the war between Hamas and Israel continues, the specter of other parties entering the conflict looms over the Middle East. One of the darker possibilities, and certainly a very escalatory one, would be if Iran somehow decided to openly join the fight. It already warned Israel of possible regional escalation. This video will explore Iran's options if it wanted to hurt Israel militarily and complicate Israel's operations against Hamas. Likewise, we will explore Israel's options in mitigating the potential Iranian threat. So stay tuned. If Iran wants to actively participate in the conflict, it has several options. It can do what it's been doing for years now, funneling funds and weapons to its proxies, like the Hezbollah. Or it can try to coerce or entice other countries to join it against Israel, or it can attack Israel on its own. If it wanted to go that last route, it certainly can do some damage via missiles. But the reality is that even if political repercussions are thrown out the window for the moment, there is the tyranny of distance involved. Iran has to go through Iraq as well as Syria. Turkey is not a very viable route option, as Turkey is a regional power and a NATO member, and it could likely stop any incursions into its airspace on its own. Iraq, on the other hand, has become more chummy with Iran ever since the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003. The Iraqi government is nowadays dominated by Shia Muslims, similar to Iran, reflecting Shia population overall. Iran has also become Iraq's biggest trading partner. Gaza Strip population is predominantly Sunni Muslim, but that didn't stop the Iraqi government for condemning Israeli actions in the 2008 Gaza war. The Iraqi Shia leader called for action by Muslim states to stop Israeli operations. Today, there is still no diplomatic relations established between Iraq and Israel. In fact, back in 2012, the Iraqi Prime Minister said Iraq wants relations with all countries except Israel. Last year, the Iraqi parliament passed a bill that prohibits normalization of relations with Israel. While the Iraqi government has not yet said anything on the current Israeli operations in Gaza, various local and religious leaders have. Sadrist leader, Fatah Alliance leader and Shia religious leader have all denounced Israeli operations and/or called for an intervention to stop those operations. So while it's in no way assured that Iraq itself would participate in any action against Israel, as that would likely invoke massive geopolitical pressure by the US and other countries, it's somewhat plausible that if Iran decides to send aircraft and missiles towards Israel, that Iraq might simply look the other way, saying it's in no position to police its own skies. Iraq has in fact several dozen fairly useful fighter planes, as well as 24 Pantsir air defense systems bought from Russia, though their crews don't train much and might not be very effective. But we digress. Going through Iraq would not be enough. Syria would also need to be traversed, though as its government is sympathetic to Iran, there would likely be no comments there. Jordan would not be an option since it has good relations with Israel and the West. While it would not be able to stop ballistic missiles on Israel, it could intercept invading Iranian aircraft. And all that is before we get to Israeli air might, which is considerable, to say the least, with over 300 frontline unit combat jets, all of them either modernized in the 1990s and 2000s or of newer make, like the F-35. Coupled with all the early warning systems Israel has, as well as Israel's fairly potent air defense network, the compact form of Israel as a country would be very well protected against aircraft incursions. It's unlikely that whatever planes Iran could muster to cross such a huge distance would manage to do anything meaningful, other than getting shot down. The distance involved is simply too great for most of the Iranian fighters to fly to Israel even empty, and let alone with a meaningful load. Iran has some 2 or 3 operational tanker aircraft, which might help a few dozen F-4s and F-14s to get across. Other planes would be of little help when it comes to bomb delivery. Using standoff munitions like air-launched cruise missiles would be a safer bet for Iran, and even other types like the Su-24s have been observed with such weapons. But the issue there is the fact that Iran doesn't likely have vast stocks of cruise missiles, especially compact air-launched ones. Since mid-last decade, several such missile types have been tested, but not many have been actually put into service, as Iran had issues with sourcing miniaturized jet engine technology. Lately, that seems to have been overcome, but still it's unlikely we're talking about hundreds of air-launched missiles deployed. For comparison, a country like the United Kingdom has fewer than 800 such weapons. There are of course larger ground-launched cruise missiles. Iran has had those since a decade ago and has slowly been building up their inventory. That being said, no one really knows if by 2023 we could be talking about a few hundred such large long-range missiles or over 1,000. The Sumar family of missiles, in its recent variants, has managed to yield ranges of over 1,300 kilometers while flying low. That's enough to fire such a missile from Iran and have it reach anywhere in Israel. In theory. In practice, the missile would still be confined by its limited approach vector through Syria, maybe through Jordan, though then it could be detected even earlier and fired upon by Jordan. And once it gets near Israel, it would more likely than not get detected and shot down. Iranian missiles aren't stealthy and would likely get shot down at least at the same rate as Ukraine shoots down Russian missiles, but probably more often, due to the limited approach vector, compact size of Israel, and thus a greater density of air defenses. Thus, even if Iran can somehow launch a very optimistic 500 cruise missiles, it's questionable if more than 100 or so would actually hit anything inside Israel. In the grand scheme of things, that would amount to a nuisance for Israel. Israel, for example, said it dropped 6,000 bombs on the Gaza Strip in the first 6 days of its operations. What could be more dangerous are Iran's ballistic missiles. Those fly high up and are very fast. While shorter range, slower types could be intercepted by Patriot-like systems, such missiles aren't a factor precisely due to their short range. Iran's ballistic missiles encompass a myriad of types and subtypes, some of which were only developmental models, and some, as mentioned, simply lack range. Those actually likely make up the majority of Iranian ballistic missile arsenal. As the complexity of a missile rises with range and size, so does the price tag, both of the missile itself and the whole support system around it. So while a small missile like the US ATACMS cost $1.5 million in 2022, if the US were to make larger ballistic missiles, their cost could easily be an order of magnitude bigger. If a missile also has a hypersonic glide warhead, costs can rise even further. For example, the US Dark Eagle missile costs a whopping $40 million, projected for a 300 missile production run. For a missile to reach Israel, it has to have a range of over 1,000 kilometers, likely more, to increase the number of launch areas in Iran, and possibly even over 1,500 kilometers if depressed trajectories are to be used, which are less efficient range-wise but are harder to intercept. Added technological items to increase precision, maneuverability, radar cross-section are all possible. Iran does use such techniques in their newest missiles, like the Khorramshahr family, but those make the missile even more expensive, thus less likely to be produced in high numbers. A number of missiles per type available to Iran is a metric that's simply not available. There are satellite images out there which show 16 launcher trailers for the Khorramshahr missile outside its production facility during the spring of 2023. But whether that means the production pace is 60 launchers per year, or less or more, that's hard to tell. Plus, early versions of Khorramshahr have been shown since 2017. To date, 4 separate variants have been observed. It's likely mass production has not started in 2017 for the said early variant. But whether Iran has 100 of such advanced missiles or a few hundred, that's impossible to say. What is known is that in March 2022, the commander of US Central Command, General McKenzie, said Iran has over 3,000 ballistic missiles, many of which can reach Israel, end quote. That statement is still vague, but it's likely the 2022 count was closer to 3,000 rather than 4,000, and due to reasons explained earlier, it's unlikely the missiles with ranges of over 1,000 kilometers compose over half of the said number, if that. Still, given that it's late 2023 now, it's plausible Iran might have 500 to 1,500 ballistic missiles that can indeed reach Israel. Now, part of those are older types, still basically oversized Scud types, though they use separate re-entry warheads. Shahib-3 and its later variants, Imad and Ghadr, are such older types. Still potent in range, and with a large warhead they are a threat. Their speed is likely to be around Mach 7, give or take a Mach. They don't maneuver, and initially their guidance left a lot to be desired. Initial Shahib-3 missiles could allegedly hit within 2 kilometers of their target 50% of the time. But that was 20 years ago. Since then, Iran has shown better and better precision. 10 or so years ago, videos of tests suggested errors of a few hundred meters. While for the newest Khorramshahr missile types, Iran claims they improved their precision from 60 to 30 meters. Such precision can already be quite useful militarily, especially considering Iranian officials say warheads of up to 1.8 tons in weight can be carried. Iran has been known to use cluster munition warheads on their missiles. With said precision, cluster munitions would likely result in basically pinpoint accuracy. Of course, destroying individual small buildings or hardened targets, that's still not likely. Of the types mentioned, the Khorramshahr, likely based on North Korean Musudan design, and the K-Bar Shekan are the most advanced. Khorramshahr incorporates thrusters for course correction, and its warhead is optimized for re-entry, producing the lowest possible radar return. Its velocity is also quite high, being Mach 16 at mid-course stage and Mach 8 at atmosphere re-entry. K-Bar Shekan, which was unveiled last year, is even more advanced, though smaller. It is said to be able to maneuver in its terminal stage, countering anti-missile systems, though its impact speed is slower. It's likely such advanced missiles compose an even smaller part of Iran's arsenal than the mentioned 500 to 1500 missile estimate. But intercepting them is likely not easy. That's why Israel devised a special anti-ballistic missile system, called the Arrow. In its latest variant, the Arrow 3, the system hits incoming missiles in their mid-course phase, out in space. Israel is lucky as it's very compact, and Iranian missiles are generally gonna come from a fairly narrow cone of directions. That makes missile tracking and interception somewhat easier. Though at well over Mach 5 or even Mach 10, interception is never easy. So far, it's been estimated Israel has 3 such Arrow batteries deployed, enough to engage a dozen or 2 dozen incoming missiles at once. As Iran has several missiles per launcher, it's plausible Israel could intercept a fair chunk of Iranian missiles. For terminal interception, systems like David's Sling could be used, though their efficiency against such targets is unknown. Israel decided to develop said system instead of investing further in Patriot SAMs. As we saw in Ukraine, with slower but just as advanced or more advanced Iskanders, advanced Patriot systems scored pretty well. It's unknown if David's Sling performance can match the latest PAC-3 MSE missile performance, as used in Ukraine. But it's yet another layer of the shield protecting Israel from Iran's missiles. Ultimately, it's likely Iran can fire more missiles at once than Russia, and some missiles would ultimately hit inside Israel. But we're still talking about maybe 100 or at best a few hundred warheads. Compared to a proper war effort, such numbers would amount to harassment. A terror for the general population. Maybe some very large targets such as military air bases being hit, but ultimately a fairly small speck on the overall Israeli state or its military capabilities. Plus, ballistic missiles can't be replenished in numbers quickly, unlike small loitering munitions. In theory, what could have a somewhat greater effect is if Iran manages to smuggle a big number of kamikaze drones like Rad-85 and other similar munitions, and then those get launched daily in high numbers from Syria and Lebanon. There's a whole host of Iranian-made kamikaze drones, ranging from big and heavy ones like Shahed 131 to tiny Mirage, similar to US Switchblade munitions. Syria has the better part of its territory under its government's control. Its military was helped by Iran, and weapons and even troops were reaching Syria through Iraq regularly during the height of the Syrian civil war. Also, Hezbollah in Lebanon would possibly be delighted if it got such loitering munitions from Iran. Now, such actions would definitely broaden the war. If Iran deploys its own military there, that could make Israel possibly invade both Lebanon and Syria, at least in some limited incursions, trying to hunt down drone launchers. In a way, if Israel is pressured into doing that, The sole fact the war widened could be more damaging to Israel than whatever actual destructive effort such drones could have, which is why Israel might not be so quick to send in ground troops, and would initially try to simply fight drones with its air defenses and use air power to seek out and destroy drone launchers. If Iran can't smuggle enough launchers and loitering munitions, their effect would be minuscule. The munitions need to be launched in huge waves, so some have a chance of overwhelming the defenses. That's what we were seeing in Ukraine, with Russia waiting for a few weeks at a time to accumulate enough munitions to start a short-term attack campaign. Loitering munitions such as Shaheeds are slow, fairly easy to destroy once detected, and have a small warhead. Plus, Iran and its proxies would lack real-time info on anything that's not a fixed-site target. So it's likely even such tactical-sized drones would be used either against industrial targets, against fixed military bases, or simply as weapons of terror. Larger loitering munitions like Shahed 136, made famous by Russian use in Ukraine, or the Arash-2 possess enough range to be launched from Iran itself. But they too are slow and not very destructive. Their simple flight profiles still mean they're easy to track, despite their almost strategic reach. Numbers are hard to estimate. The US Defense Intelligence Agency estimated Russia received at least 400 Shaheeds by July 2023. Ukraine, on the other hand, said Russia got 1,700 Shaheeds during 2022. So 1,000 Shaheeds in Russia, give or take a 500? One could expect Iran itself to have more, but at the same time, likely not 10 times more, as Russia was likely to buy as many as it could. It's plausible, though, that if Iran can indeed amass huge attack waves of several hundred such drones on a small area, many would go through. But once again, their long-term effect on Israel would be fairly small. They would be weapons of terror mostly, and in the long run, Iran would run out of enough drones for such huge attacks that can't be matched by air defenses. Besides small drones, there's always the possibility of small rocket artillery smuggled via Iraq into the hands of Hezbollah. But that can be said for all sorts of other weapons. We're entering a political realm here, of course. How far would Hezbollah want to get involved, even if Iran entices them? For now, for all the media headlines, the fact is Hezbollah has been fairly restrained. Iran's foreign minister recently said Iran's regional militias could attack Israel. If operations against Palestinians do not stop, that multiple fronts will inevitably open, end quote. But that could be posturing. Hezbollah leadership has kept low-key for now. Hezbollah spokesperson recently said that the exchange of fire on the border does not indicate that Hezbollah had made the decision to enter the war, and that they are only small skirmishes to send a warning to Israel. The fact that the Hezbollah leader has not said anything yet may also point to uncertainty within Hezbollah itself. So it's not assured that Iranian pressure could actually push Hezbollah into war. But certainly, if Iran manages to push Hezbollah into war, that would be by far a bigger threat to Israel than all these air, drone and missile strikes mentioned so far. Chain's defense publication estimated in 2017 that Hezbollah had 25,000 active troops and another 25 or so thousand reservists. In 2021, Hezbollah's leaders said they have 100,000 troops. The truth may be somewhere in the middle. While those figures may be comparable to whatever Hamas can muster if mobilized in Gaza, the fact remains Hezbollah is better trained, more experienced, and better equipped than Hamas. While they mostly lack big systems like tanks and air defenses, they have a large number of advanced anti-tank systems and shoulder-launched anti-air missiles, and between 130 and 150,000 tactical rocket artillery munitions. That's according to the Israeli government. While unguided and small and fairly easy to be shot down, their sheer numbers would mean Israel would regularly have issues intercepting all. Some have a decent range, even reaching Tel Aviv. But the most dangerous aspect of Hezbollah is that they are battle-trained, both by the 2006 war against Israel and by years of operations in Syria. Plus, Hezbollah is said to regularly train in Iran as well. Iran would certainly be shipping as many weapons through Iraq and Syria to Hezbollah as it can. But as for actual troops on the ground, that's less likely. Iranian troops attacking Israel from Syria or Lebanon, that would be a serious escalation. At that point, Western powers would possibly go to war against Iran itself. So overall, Iranian options against Israel are limited. They exist, but no single option is really effective. All the long-range strike options combined would still amount to something Israel could shrug off. It's only if Hezbollah gets involved 100%, fully supplied by Iran, while Israel is, for example, fully involved in a ground war in Gaza, and while the West Bank is full of violent protests, only then would Israel be truly tested. But even then, in the long run, it's questionable what a militia-style force like Hezbollah, even if supplied by Iran, even if well-trained, can do in offensive actions against Israel. When defending in Lebanon, they could do fairly okay. But offensively, a militia force won't be able to redirect Israeli forces from Gaza up north. That's precisely why Israel mobilized 360,000 reservists, to have a backup if Hezbollah gets involved. Furthermore, if Israel after settling Gaza redirects against Hezbollah, and if Israel goes into Lebanon proper, Iran risks losing a powerful and important ally. While Hezbollah probably can't be fully destroyed, Israel could diminish its power greatly for many years to come. To sum it up, Iran can meddle in the current conflict, but it can't do anything to truly change its outcome. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.